Alright, when I first started bass fishing, I used one type of bait all year round, and that was a soft plastic worm on a weightless rig. And that worked really well for me all summer long and into the fall, but then as soon as the temperatures dropped, I was catching no bass on that rig. I learned that there were different baits you should use for different temperatures, and once I started switching up my baits as the season changed, I was catching so much more fish throughout the year. So I'm going to explain the baits that you should use for each season. Now, you don't have to use these baits to catch the fish, but these are the baits that work the best when catching bass. Starting off with spring, you got two parts of spring. You got the early spring, which is generally colder, and then you got late spring, which gets warmer. And temperature really affects how active bass are. This bait worked pretty much all spring for me. And I don't typically go fishing too much in the spring, but when I do, I will usually throw out a jerk bait. That's just what I found for spring fishing, is jerk baits are one of the best lures you could use. Other stuff works too, but I tend to catch a lot more bass off of jerk baits. Alright, then you got summertime, which typically in summer it's really hot, the water's hot, and the bass don't like to move too much when the water's that warm. The bass like to hide down in the shadows where the water's a lot cooler, because the rest of the water's super hot and they tend to not like it too much. So in the summertime, these baits here are what you want to throw. You got the buzz bait here, you got spinner bait, you got top water, you got a crank, and then you also got soft plastic worms. I've had luck with all these baits over my time of fishing, in the summertime especially. This crankbait here is one of the lures you can use. This crankbait here is one of the lures you can use all year round. They work really well in the fall. I've had luck in the spring with these, summertime, even in the winter I've had some luck with them. But in the summertime they work pretty well. Spinnerbaits, great bass fishing lure, really commonly known bass fishing lure, and they work really well in the summertime. Got your buzz baits, they work great in the summer because they resemble a top water, make a lot of noise to get the bass aggressive. If you don't know what a buzz bait is, it basically, when you are reeling it in, this part spins across the top of the water and it makes a lot of splashing and buzzing, and it really gets the bass's attention and they get really aggressive and want to smack up on it, just like a top water. Top waters are great as well. Summertime is probably one of the best times for top water because that's when the bass are really into it, and that's when things like frogs are really moving across the water. And then rubber worms, also, in my opinion, one of the lures you can use all year round. You can use them in the fall, you can use them early spring or late spring, and all summer long. Also, what I forgot to mention is you got two parts of summer. You got early summer to midsummer, and then you got late summer. And some baits work better than others during each half of summer. You got crankbaits will probably work better during the later half of summer rather than earlier summer, and then with the rubber worms, I've had luck with these all summer long, and they're probably one of my go-tos for summertime bass fishing. For fall is a pretty good time for bass fishing. The baits that work the best for these are you got jerk baits, spinner baits, lipless crankbaits, tubes, and you got the jigs. Now, I don't own any tubes or jigs or lipless crankbaits, mostly because either they're broken or I just don't really have an interest in using them. But to start off with a lipless crankbait, it's a crankbait like this, just without that lip right there, and usually the part you tie your line on is usually up here, and that usually works really well for fall bass fishing. You got the jerk baits, which same thing as spring. They work really well. I don't have as much luck with fall than I do with springtime bass fishing with jerk baits, but they do still work. Spinner baits, they typically work better in summertime and fall, but great bait for fall bass fishing. Tubes, they work really well if you rig them up, put a weight at the head of them, and skip them across the bottom. Usually if it's a lot colder, those get a lot of attention and catch a lot of bass. And jigs, they also work really well haven't used too many of them, but I have caught bass off of them. Now, since I'm not a big wintertime bass fisherman, I don't have a lot of the right jigs for wintertime, but I do know what you do need for them. And the baits you should use for wintertime are you got spoons, you got deep suspending jerk baits. This isn't quite one, but jerk baits work as well. You got tail spinners, grubs, blade spinners, and tail spinners. I don't have a lot of experience with these kinds of baits, but I've heard that they work really well. So to sum it all up, you got spring baits, which usually work, or I should say spring bait, because there really is only one that I use for spring, and that's a jerk bait. And in the summer, you got crank spinners and top water bait that typically work best for summertime bass fishing. For fall, you got lipless crank spinner baits, tubes, jigs, the whole 9 yard of them that I don't use too much of them, but some of them I do own, like the cranks and the spinners. And then for winter, you got the spoons, you got the tail spinners, you also got jerk baits for them, and the list just goes on. You got the year-round baits that I've had luck with in almost all the seasons, which are the spinners. I had 3 out of the 4. Crankbaits, also 3 out of 4. Then you got the jerk baits, which typically work best for late fall, early spring, and winter. Alright, thanks for watching. Sorry that I couldn't give a lot of examples for some of the seasons, like spring I could only give jerk bait, and for winter I didn't have any examples to give you, but thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, comment down below and I will answer all of them.